Hello everybody, my name is Dave Harrington and I'm going to be discussing um, ecosystem mapping for domestic violent extremism. Alright, so a quick overview. Um, Domestic violent extremism is nothing new to the United States. In fact, for the most part, we were born from domestic violent extremism. And but today it's mutated into a pretty complex and multifaceted and consistently and constantly evolving problem that we really need to pay attention to, specifically us in our category as Homeland Security managers and emergency managers, because it has a direct connected relationship to what we do. So I'm going to be talking about a few nodes before I share the map. And the first node grouping, I guess, would be the extremism node. And so in that, we see kind of this categorical framework that our government pays attention to. And they've broken it down into these areas. And this is the primary focus of who we're looking at when we're discussing domestic extremists. So, starting around the clock, we look at ethno-nationalists, and that's racially and ethnically motivated violent extremists. And then a very small percentage of abortion-related violent extremists. Next, animal rights and environmental extremists. And then all other domestic terrorist threats that couldn't be categorized into that grouping. And then the last and the second largest is the anti-government, anti-authority violent extremists. And it's important to note that in that anti-government, anti-authority violent extremists, that's where we see the right wing and the left wing branches of violent extremism, as discussed before. So next, the hierarchy of law enforcement. Really, I kind of battle back and forth with these are nodes, and law enforcement in and of itself is a major node. But I wanted to share with you a thought that we have a hierarchical framework for law enforcement, and they have a linear process to combat a very nonlinear problem. So there's a trickle up and a trickle down, and so it goes from the very, very local law enforcement to state level to federal level, and it's very interesting to see how they work together, and but it's very structured and very orderly, and very linear in its procedure and process. So back to the nodes. When we're discussing environmental factors with mapping, really these are the major environmental things that come into play with systems mapping for domestic extremism. And not surprisingly, economics is always at the top, especially now. With any economy, extremism exists, but with particularly more difficult economies, it seems to be an exacerbated problem on both ends of the spectrum. Next is environmental, which is also connected to economic. In fact, all of these are connected to economic, and that's of note, and why I put economics at the top. And then social, so social interaction, and then I'm also going to go so far as to add social media into this, and I want to make a separation here between media and social media, because the media in and of itself, there are news functions and our news groups that share information with us, versus social media. If you think about it, uh, perhaps it's like what Professor Holling shares with us about like where's our work being cited from, and I think of lately social media is kind of like, well, where's the information from? Is it relevant? Is it just hearsay on Facebook? Stuff like that. Uh, Next environmental factor is energy. Energy is always a major factor. I'm going to attach into this like um, oil and fuel and um, those things. That's always a significant factor. And then education. In education, we see kind of two ways this could be influenced. Um, Education level by the uh, the people involved in these events, but also education of how are we sharing knowledge and information about domestic extremism to those that are not, and what to watch out for. And then lastly, like I discussed earlier, the media section, the media group, they are particularly to blame for polarizing and developing extremism. Okay, so this is my map, and you can see kind of a very evident left side and a very evident right side, and then an interconnected middle. And so, going back through the economics, I added international terrorism, the media, drug trade, and mass shootings. These are all interconnected feedback loops that just one feeds into the other, and back up. And this is something that really economics is attached to all of this, and so is the media, and so is drug trade, and so is mass shootings, and so is international terrorism. So I put that in the middle to really emphasize the consistent feedback loops that occur, that continue, I guess, fueling uh, one another. The media fuels drug trade fuels mass shooting, fuels the media, which, and it continues on and on and on in an endless loop. And then if you're looking through the map, you can see, so in the domestic violent extremist side, I kind of added an interconnected web of the different groups that we focus on, from religious, ethno-national, abortion, environmental, animal rights, and political. And then on the law enforcement side, you can see where I added educational and a few others, like judicial process. A lot of our legal proceedings are encumbered by a significant process, and so that really gums up the works sometimes. Also, identification and what we're looking at and why we're looking at, and if we're allowed to look at. That's a real problem. And one of the things I noticed when I was researching school shootings, school shootings are not considered acts of domestic terrorism yet. And if they were, their funding would be different on how we could identify and investigate and surveil potential future threats. Another major aspect, and one that I think we tend to consider less, but has a significant economic impact, is our punishment cycle with law enforcement. So once a person's incarcerated, like if they get life in prison, what does that mean for the system, and how much does that cost? And the answer is pretty astounding. My father, growing up, was a correctional officer at a federal prison in my hometown, and I remember him talking as a kid about the Millionaires Club. What the Millionaires Club was, any federal prisoner that had been incarcerated for more than 5 years was considered to have cost the taxpayers over $1 million. So, just consider the number of people we have in our prison system and how long they've been there, you can see it's a significant pot of money. And then just kind of checking through the last through areas of surveillance and infrastructure protection, energy protection, and then as a whole you can see the very interconnected nature of this systems map. So leverage points, in the National Security Council document, they identify 4 pillars of domestic terrorism that is our focus. And right now, what those pillars are first to understand and share what domestic terrorism is and related information so that people know what we're looking at. The next is to prevent domestic terrorism recruitment and mobilization to violence. Thirdly, to disrupt and deter domestic terrorism activity in the home front. And then lastly, to confront long-term contributors of domestic terrorism. These are the leverage points that our subject matter experts have come in, kind of dialed in on, and is the focus on gaining a foothold on this problem. Then lastly, this is my reference page, and if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to me. Thanks so much. Have a great day.